All right, guys, so we'll get started, and if people come on, that's fine. Most of you know me and Peter, we're your attorneys. There might be some CPAs on here too who just saw a different presentation from us, so you're more than welcome. Essentially, the IRS, well, just to back up. So on September 14th, 2023, the IRS announced a moratorium on processing claims because they said that there is a lot of fraud in the system and they need to figure out better guardrails in order to protect, the American taxpayer from paying out these claims. They also said they were going to announce a withdrawal program and a voluntary disclosure program. 40 some odd days later, they announced a withdrawal program where people can rescind claims that have not been paid yet. I think $130 billion has been withdrawn from that system in that amount of time. I believe the IRS thought that a lot more folks were going to be able to use it or were going to use it than they have. Peter likes to point out that their withdrawal program allows you to withdraw while you're under exam, which is unique and may possibly give people less incentive to withdraw. We're unsure. Then on December 21st, last day of fall, the IRS announced a voluntary disclosure program that is for folks that have received payment that believe their claims are incorrect, that they're not really eligible employers, that their qualified wages are wrong or whatever, and they want to return those funds to the IRS. So all of this is a kind of a way for the IRS to kind of get a hold of itself on what's been going on in this program from the beginning, where they really just didn't have enough information on the forms. We're processing forms with no understanding of whether or not somebody's eligible or what the wages are based on. And then, it's a 3-year statute. And so they were trying to figure out how to handle all this. So then January 10th, Danny Werfel, the IRS commissioner, met with the Senate Finance Committee in a closed-door session, explained a lot of problems that the IRS is having with this program. There's fraud. The audit statute is the same as the refund statute. There's a lot of marketing companies and unscrupulous folks that are handling these claims for people. And those people don't have any licenses, certifications, they've made a ton of money. They don't really know how to handle all of these problems that they're having in the program. So Werfel kind of gave a list of complaints. Then in the House, Democrats and Republicans are trying to pass legislation in a tax bill to increase the child tax credit, research and development tax credit, bonus depreciations, a bunch of things. They want to give out a lot of credits to taxpayers. And in order to pay for that, Werfel suggested that they end the employee retention credit early on January 31st. So this is the legislation that we wanted to talk to you guys about, the legislation that was introduced to the House on Friday, the 19th. I believe it's going for a vote on the 29th.
So introduced on the 17th, amended on the 18th. The committee markup was the 19th, passed the House Ways and Means Committee 40-3 to report out to the House. Still needs to go through the Rules Committee, which can be a stumbling block. The speaker has a lot of influence here still, and from my understanding hasn't committed one way or to the other as far as support or not. And then you still have the Senate as well that is going to weigh in. And I don't think that Senator Crapo of Idaho has weighed in. The big issue here, the thing that is driving this, is the child tax credit. So during the pandemic, the child tax credit was increased. It was paid out in increments to families who are eligible instead of waiting to claim it, at the end of the tax year. And it was wildly popular and had a tremendous effect on childhood poverty. I think somewhere between 40 and 50% declines in childhood poverty rates. So the Democrats have wanted that back. The Republicans have tried to unwind some of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act stuff, the Trump era tax stuff. in exchange, or I guess sort of trading. It's unclear where the political will is. I mean, the Democrats, 3 of them voted against it. I suspect because they think there is an unbalance between the tax effects for businesses versus the tax effect in the child tax credit. The big issue, though, you know, and the way that the legislative calendar is unwinding, is that the date written into the legislation right now is January 31st. It's a date certain. Rebecca referenced January 29th as the next action. And there's no way, even if it got voted out of the House on January 29th, once they're back from recess, there's no way the Senate is picking this up and passing it before the deadline. So everybody, you know, working in this space has to assume that January 31st is the deadline. For reference, because the last time we met, we didn't have the name of the bill, but it's called the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act of 2024. I don't know if that fits neatly into an acronym. Doesn't appear so.
But essentially, so what we're doing, so if you are clients of ours or prospective clients of ours and you have not filed yet, we are trying to get your forms out as quickly as possible. We're happy to answer those questions right now. We can kind of move to people who have filed and that kind of thing. But for now, if you are in that unfiled bucket, we can answer those questions. I know I see one of you anyway on here that I know off the top. I sent your forms this morning. So that's
well, there's someone here who have filed pre-moratorium too, and just sort of as an update, we still haven't seen anything processed from the IRS since late August. So they have repeatedly said there is no moratorium on previously filed claims filed prior to September 14th. But we haven't seen that actually materialize.
So yeah, anyone in this list that are people that have questions about stuff going out, how is it working, what's the process, that kind of stuff.
And you guys all have the ability to unmute, or
you should be able to, yeah. If not, send a message in the chat.
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with.
There's also some other things that are in this new legislation that talks about increasing the audit statute to 6 years, which is something folks should be aware of. It's unclear, you know, that passed the markup without any trouble.
ERC wasn't brought up at all in the mark. Well, there were some congressmen and women who made reference to it in their opening statements or in their statements, but there were no amendments added during that markup. So it was all about the child tax credit, and then some comments related to the imbalance between the TCJA changes and the child tax credit stuff. So ERC was not a focus. It's just being used as a pay for the legislation.
And for what it's worth, it's already exceeded what it was supposed to cost. So it's not really paying for it. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. Anyone have any questions in general? So if you filed, you can, you know, just for everyone, if you filed and you have questions, you want us to know what's going on, like what are your recourse method? If you want us to like talk about that, because I know it's been a long time for some of you folks. What I'm not sure what your questions are. We're happy to talk more about it. I just don't know necessarily what you all want to know about. Well, so just as far as the ERC stuff goes, then the IRS also issued a press release on the 10th. January is really a lot of stuff's happening. On the 10th, they issued a press release. They said it was going to take them another 4 months to scan their paper returns. And then what they're going to do is start implementing some AI procedures to help kind of audit claims. So what that means is they're going to start using other government agencies to trying to fact check the ERC using, robots and whatnot. So if you've filed W-2s with 5 employees and you filed the ERC with 50 employees, they're going to try to catch you that way. If you have a control group and you have 500 EINs that you have K1s for, and each one of those EINs filed, maybe that gives you some sort of aggregation issue. They might be able to get you that way. There's different things that they're trying to do. They're not really sure how to fix their problem. Right now, as of December 9th, the number was 1,057,000 returns behind. They've not updated that number yet, and it's January 23rd. So it's gotta be 1.5.
No, I think that the moratorium had a big effect.
It did, but now they're talking about ending the program. So I would just imagine that there'd be like an upswing.
I don't know if it would be that big, but
Maybe
really,
1.2.
Yeah, they really slowed down as a result.
Yeah, a lot of the marketing companies that do this, that popped up, overnight just to do this type of thing, kind of stopped filing. I know one of the big players that was written about in the Wall Street Journal laid off like 85% of their staff. So hopefully that means that the claims that are being filed now are good claims, and it's going to make it a lot easier for the IRS to do its job.
Interestingly enough, the National Taxpayer Advocate had comments to the other effect in the Tax Notes article from yesterday, saying that by cutting it off, you're really encouraging people to file last minute. And of course, you've got people who are legitimately eligible and are not going to be able to meet the deadline. So it's gonna be challenging.
Chat disabled. Well, that's not good. Hopefully the chat works. If not, my 941s were received on 9/25. Am I in the clear as far as ERC ending? Yes, you're definitely filed. The 131 deadline, and what we're doing a double check just on everyone to make sure that we can see the forms and that everything is all
So
straight.
I'll give a little bit more of a nuanced answer.
Wow.
Because it is at least theoretically possible that somebody marking up this bill or an amendment from the House floor or something in the Senate could come back and they could say, well, we want to pick a different date. January 31st is as arbitrary as any other one. So we haven't, seen anything in writing to suggest a different date, and that seems to be what they're moving forward on. But continue to track it, because they could pick a different date.
From what we're looking at, you're good.
Certainly, the language in the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act of 2024. It's going to take a minute to have that roll off the tongue.
So Charles asked if there's any advantage to contacting our state tax advocate. Yeah, sure.
Maybe. I mean, Charles, that is the next step, is to contact the taxpayer advocate. That's the next logical step. They've said that they're working on these claims. The National Taxpayer Advocate has been sympathetic to business owners who are waiting and been patient with the moratorium and sort of anticipating processing beginning in the new year, and it hasn't. So they've indicated that they're issuing taxpayer assistance orders, which is what you would be asking for. And the thing is that the IRS can appeal a taxpayer assistance order, and you're not really a party to that appeal. So that is the next logical step. So if that's something you're interested in doing,
let us know in February if you don't mind. John, you said you had 2 questions. If you want to unmute yourself and ask, is that okay?
Sure. I didn't mean to hit enter on that, and meant to have the 2 questions there for you. So sorry.
You're good.
My first question is there any expectation that in their new procedures, once they get them going, that they're gonna be doing some additional vetting of
I would
the
imagine so.
actual qualifications?
I believe, I mean, that's what they're saying they're going to do. Certainly with this AI stuff, they're going to try to do that.
Yeah, but like yeah, like I understand like the employee counts, the fraud aspect of, that.
I would expect exam to ramp up. I would expect you to have more exams. I would expect there to be more questions, even just document exams, like, hey, show us why you're eligible and send in a packet.
Okay,
I'm kind of surprised that there isn't more of those like low level exams
yeah,
that they could at least put on the air of,
Yeah, I mean, I think you can anticipate some scrutiny, everything from the scanning to the sort of AI, does it pass the sniff test, all the way to a full-blown employment tax exam, and sort of everything in between that you may or may not know about. I mean, it's still a resource question. I mean, we obviously don't advise on audit risk, but the resources, it's no secret that the government doesn't really have all the resources that they need in order to do what they would really like to do, I think, in this space. But truly, I think you should anticipate the scrutiny, but we don't know exactly what that's going to look like.
okay. Yeah, I mean, from my experience of people who do contact the IRS, and this has been since the beginning about ERC, it just seems to me the IRS's default is always to say you don't qualify. I mean, I've had people call them up and say, hey, I'm submitting my stuff. Do I qualify? Without even asking a single question, just tell them no, you don't. So, my guess is that there's going to be that direction. The other question is legally, and I don't think this was mentioned earlier, but forgive me if it was. Legally, they can't retroactively repeal this, right? They can't go and say,
they
you know what?
can.
Okay, they go back and say September 18th or 16th when
Sure.
we made our announcement. We're
They've
not.
already done it.
What's that?
They did it for Q4 of 21. It passed November 15th. The build, was that the infrastructure or the Build Back Better?
No, so the American Rescue Plan added quarters 3 and quarter 4 eligibility, to include advising taxpayers that they didn't need to make deposits if they thought they were eligible for those periods. And then November 27th of 2021, so literally during the middle of Q4, they came back and closed the program for almost all people, for Q4. So they've certainly done that sort of retroactive, like ex post facto laws are permitted as long as they're not criminal in nature or overly punitive. So terminating a
Credit.
civil program, I think would probably be okay. Although I am not a constitutional scholar, and you would be getting into some of those issues if.
But Congress also have constituents that are business owners.
Right.
And, you folks represent some of them. There are absolutely still very straightforward, legitimate, no questions asked claims. This morning, I talked to somebody who's eligible for $2 million based on a gross receipt decline in all quarters. Very, very black and white, clear, not subjective. There's no legal analysis. Eligibility. Like, there's plenty of folks that they would be cutting off. That wouldn't be a good look for them. It doesn't seem like something that they want to do. Telling people they, have only had 2.5 years to do it and say, okay, you've got until January 31st is a better look than going back.
Sure. Yep. I gotcha.
And just to kind of comment on what you were saying before is that like the IRS has now kind of changed their stance on it. That's absolutely true. In the beginning, this was advertised as like a broad-based program. Most people are going to be eligible. And then something happened along the way where the IRS just was getting hammered by marketing companies, by, watching people on the radio, celebrities kind of selling this stuff. And, they've changed their opinion quite a bit in who's eligible. What does it mean to have these things? They issued notices that talk about like nominal portion, nominal effect. And it doesn't necessarily go with what their messaging is these days.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else have any other questions?
And just, Charles, just to be clear, we're happy to help you with that, that process of contacting the taxpayer advocate.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our process hasn't changed, just so you all know. What we thought was not great eligibility arguments coming from other folks, seems like we're in the same agreement with, with the IRS and their new generic legal advice memorandums that they've issued in, July and November on OSHA and supply chain claims. For companies that are trying to wrestle and do this correctly, I'll say this deadline is very challenging. But we're continuing to try and do everything the same way, not, lose our due diligence standards in that. So feel comfortable in that we're still checking all of the boxes. We're doing everything that we can and trying to get the returns filed as quickly as possible. And, who knows? Maybe this legislation doesn't go through and we're just going through a fire drill just to see if we can do it. And then we'll see what happens. Anyone have any other questions? We can hang out for like another 5 minutes if you guys do. If you come up with something at like 2 in the morning and you want to ask us, shoot us an email, that's fine. We just thought that maybe a group setting would be a little easier to kind of manage some group questions at the same time.
Hang on. I think Denise just asked a question, but I don't see it in.
Can you explain the memorandum you requested?
What memo?
That's what she said.
I'm not clear what memorandum we're talking about.
I'm reading her question.
You talking about the GLAM? Is she asking that? Denise, you want to?
I just read you the question. I'm not sure. Denise, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question? Or do you? Oh, you don't have a mic. Okay. Do you want to just call me in 5 minutes? Okay. Yeah. Call me in 5 minutes and we'll go through what's going on.
All right. Well, we'll continue to track this stuff. Like we said, we don't anticipate anything happening legislatively until at least the 29th. It's very much still up in the air, but as council, we have to assume
The worst.
The worst, right? Because for those of you on here who haven't filed and they stick with that January 31st deadline, it goes away. It's a cliff, right? So that's why we're proceeding in this way. They're not going to have the legislation passed in January, so there's really no other
We're
way.
just assuming the worst and approving a lot of overtime. So Eric just asked, any idea when they will start processing claims again? You said they haven't since August. So the voluntary disclosure program is good through March 22nd, 2024. So our off the cuff opinion is like not before then. And then they said something about like June. So maybe July-ish?
Truth is, we don't know. I mean, when we were at the American Bar Association tax conference in Las Vegas in December, people were talking about Q2 seemed to be the rumors that sort of lines up with the idea that the voluntary disclosure program is over. Why the voluntary disclosure program, which requires the claims already be paid, would interact with the payment of new claims, it's unclear. One thing to keep in mind here is interest is going to be paid on this, and interest rates are really low right now. So one, it's not the worst for the business owner that interest is going to be paid, but it's horrible for the government and the taxpayer and the economy, because you've got millions and millions and millions. I mean, I don't even,
One of the accountants on our team who So just so you guys know, like we're like living, eating, breathing, like there's no like extra things that we're thinking about. This is what we think about all the time right now. One of the accountants that we work with did some calculations and he believes that the interest on these claims is like $50 million a day right now, 7%. Earlier was like 5 and then 6, and we're up to 7% for business owners. So people are getting massive interest checks on this. I was at a presentation before the world ended on the 17th? 17th. I think it was the 17th. It might have been the 10th. I'm not sure. Recently, very recently, I was at a presentation and somebody asked the IRS, like, hey, I know you're stopping fraud, but do you think you're stopping $50 million a day fraud? Because like this interest is pretty expensive and like, does this really make sense? And they said they believe they're stopping more than $50 million a day in fraud by doing this moratorium. So who knows? Yeah, the interest comes with the refund check. So the interest income is going to get picked up in the year you receive it. And the refund is going to get picked up in the year that it is claimed. So 2020 or 2021.
Charles, the overpayment interest is the prime rate plus 3%. So it's obviously been ticking up. So 7% is what it is now. Incrementally, it's moved its way up over time.
All right, guys. Well, we're around. We'll probably do another one of these just before the world ends. Casey will have any last minute questions. So maybe Monday next week. We'll see if there's interest. So, you know, but if you've got questions that you want to be asked before then, feel free to shoot us a message or give us a call and we'll talk to you then.